talk about Japanese employment law. And the Japanese employment or industrial relations system has long been an area of interest for foreign scholars, Japanese scholars as well, and also the popular press, because of this idea that it operates according to a different logic. So the Japanese system is being described as having 3 sacred treasures. Can you tell us what those 3 sacred treasures are, at least under this imagination? And then we'll go through each of them in turn and discuss whether, what type of changes they're undergoing in the 21st century.
Oh, yes, you're right. Japanese employment system consists of 3 pillars. The first one is lifelong employment or lifetime employment. The second one is seniority-based wages or seniority-based human resource management. The third one is Japanese labor unions are mostly enterprise-based. Enterprise unionism is the third pillar. The most important thing is the lifelong employment. Lifetime employment is a practice adopted by many Japanese corporations. The typical model of the practice is that a worker enters the company right after the graduation from school, and they enjoy secure employment until they reach the mandatory retirement age, that is age 60. This is a lifetime employment. But of course, it's now changing, and we have many changes concerning lifetime employment.
You said that lifelong employment is a practice that suggests that it has either roots in culture or at least in corporate economic practices. What role has law played in providing that security for those lifetime workers?
Okay. As I mentioned, lifetime employment or lifelong employment is just a practice. There's no legal regulations whether the employer have to promise to employ the regular worker until they reach the mandatory retirement age. No, there's no such written contract, but it is a practice. But employment security is very much respected in Japanese society because right after the World War II, many Japanese workers was in the very difficult situation. When they lost their job, it's very difficult for them and also their families. So Japanese courts, Japanese judges very much respected the employment security. So if employer arbitrarily dismiss employees, such kind of exercise of their right to dismiss employees can or regarded as an abusive exercise of the right. So abusive exercise of the right is prohibited by civil law. So the Japanese judges apply this prohibition of abusive exercise of the right to the employment dismissals. So the case law emerged, and arbitrary or unreasonable dismissal should be regarded as abusive exercise of the right. Then such dismissal was regarded as null and void. So dismissed employee had a remedy to be reinstatement. So this case law and the Japanese corporation which respected employment, because if Japanese corporation dismissed redundant workers, labor union strongly opposed such kind of strategies. So labor union was very strong at that time, right after World War II. So they required employment security. And the case also supported these trends. So employment security supported by the lifelong employment practice rooted in Japanese society.
Okay. What type of flexibility do corporations have to direct their labor? Because otherwise this sounds like a utopian dream that once you join a company, you have the pleasure of security, but there's also obligations that the employees have or powers that the employers have in terms of flexible deployment of their workers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, exactly. Employment security means the rigidity in adjusting the number of the workers. So there's a numerical rigidity. However, if employer have to maintain workers for long years, and they cannot adjust the content of employment relationship or working conditions, it is not workable system. So Japanese Supreme Court introduced a very unique rule. Employer can unilaterally modify working conditions so far as such modification can be regarded as reasonable. So employer reasonably modify working conditions. So for example, if the company suffers from very big economic loss, so the employer cannot pay full payment to all the workers. So they have to reduce the cost of the human resources. One option is dismiss redundant workers, but it is very difficult in Japan. So employer can reduce the wages. If the modification, this reduction of wages can be regarded as reasonable. For example, if you reduce the payment from 100 to 1900, that's similar to dismiss 10% surplus worker dismissals. So in Japan society, dismissal is only 10% of employee suffers from the all loss. The other 90 employee can maintain their job. But that is not fair for Japanese sense. All people, 100 people should reduce their wages from 100 to 90. Everybody will share the loss. That is more fair. It is regarded a more fair deal to deal with this economic situation in Japan.
Talk about lifelong employment. Of course, that promise of stability and the flip side of flexibility only applies to so-called permanent or regular workers. First of all, which type of workers fit within that category, typically, of the regular worker who has the protection of lifetime employment, or at least the benefit of this practice? And what are the other type of irregular or sideline workers they are, and how do they experience employment under this system?
Yes, it's a very important point. Many people talk about lifelong employment in Japan, but this system applies only to regular or standard employees. In 1990, the ratio of regular employees are nearly 90%. So we have 10% non-standard or non-regular employees. But non-regular employees ratio is year by year increasing. Now it nearly reached 40% of all the Japanese workforce. So nearly 40% of the Japanese workers are regarded as non-standard employees. So they are not covered by very protective lifelong employment system. We have three types of non-standard employees. First one is part-time workers who work, shorter than full-time workers. The second type is fixed-term contract workers. One-year contract worker will be terminated at the expiry of 1 year contract. So very unstable contract. The third type is temporary agency worker who are hired at temp agency, but they are sent to the client corporation. They provide the work to the client corporation. So there's a triangular relationship. So they're not directly hired by the client corporation. So this triangular indirect employment system. So we have three types of non-standard employees, and most of them are hired by fixed-term contract, which bring forth the unstable situation of non-standard employees.
Which type of Japanese generally have enjoyed lifetime employment, at least until the 1990s, and which type of Japanese have been in these sort of non-standard forms? Are there any patterns, or is it equally distributed across the population?
Well, actually, in the past, there's no very specific patterns. But of course, more female workers prefer part-time work because they have, some family burden. So among the part-time workers, nearly 70% of the part-time workers are female workers. And recently, we had a mandatory retirement age at age 60, but because of the pensionable age is increased from 60 to 65. So if you employ, the corporation maintains 60 years of mandatory retirement, so there's a gap between 60 to 65. So the Japanese law require private corporation to extend their employment from 60 to 65 by utilizing a fixed term contract. So we have more and more elderly fixed term contract workers. So the part-timers and the fixed term contract workers, we have some specific patterns of the workers, yes.
In some of the recent law reforms that have focused, I suppose, on part-time or agency workers or fixed-term contract workers?
The proportion of non-standard employees is increasing annually. Now, 37.5% of the workforce are non-standard employees. So, as I said today, most of them, more than 70% of those non-standard employees are hired by fixed-term contract. This is very unstable because the prohibition of abusive exercise of the right to dismiss does not apply to those fixed-term contract workers because fixed-term contract is automatically terminated at the expiry. So they are very unstable situation. This is a very bad thing for them. Not only the instability, but also working condition is much, much inferior to standard employees. So we have the two polarized system. Regular employees are very much protected, well-protected employee we have. But on the other side, we have less protected, unstable, non-standard employees. So these two gaps, huge gap becomes one recognized and regarded as a big social problems.
2020, of course, has been the year of COVID-19, and that's caused major disruption around the world, in particularly economically. So what type of impact has the pandemic had on employment practices in Japan? And do you see any future issues arising from this 2020 year?
Yes, COVID-19 had a huge impact on Japanese employment practice. Under the long-term employment, Japanese corporation preferred teamwork. Under our practice, Japanese employee hires not for the specific job, but when they conclude an employment contract, there's no job description. They agree to work for that corporation as a member of the corporation. There's no job description. So teamwork means there's no specific work for what a particular person should do. So they always discuss together and what should be done. So such kind of teamwork is a normal way of work in Japanese corporation. But COVID-19 compelled each worker to stay home and conduct remote work, which means that work must be done individually as in a separate situation. So Japanese corporation and also Japanese employees are not accustomed to such kind of way of work. So in the last several months, many people, many commentators contend that Japanese society should introduce the foreign-style job-specific employment. So telework or remote work will work efficiently. Otherwise, it's traditional way of work. It doesn't fit to this kind of telework or remote work situation. So this COVID-19 had a huge impact to the change of our traditional way of work.
Finally, before we end, we've talked about mostly lifelong employment, but of course there are those two other areas that have a work in a complementary way with it, which is enterprise or company-based unionism and seniority-based wages. Starting first with the union movement, are unions still company-based, and how has union membership shifted since the 1990s?
Mm-hmm. Actually, I think from 1975, the union membership or union density is continuously decreasing. So currently, the union density membership ratio is 16.7%. So more than 80% of the workers are not union members.
Seniority-based wages that basically rewards those who stay loyal to the company and serve with them during their life. Is that still common, or is a new form of wage determination occurring in Japan?
Yes, seniority-based wages is drastically suffering from experiencing the changes. It's changing very much. Of course, seniority-based wages not automatic increase in wages, but employer will evaluate the performance ability of the individuals. But to evaluate individuals' performance ability is very difficult. So many corporations regards when the length of service increase, then their ability would be increased similarly. So such kind of evaluation becomes very much a seniority-based one. So we have a wage profile in the right hand up. In accordance with the continuation of the service, the wage will be increased. This is seniority-based wages. But of course, it depends upon whether the individual really work efficiently for the corporation. So many corporations wanted to rectify such kind of rigid seniority-based wages. So many corporations introduce outcome-based wages, or result-based wages, or role-based wages. Such kind of new elements of the evaluation are introduced to calculate the individual wages. So people are discussing what is the best way to respect long-term employment and the wage system, which many people agree with as a rational way to decide remuneration.
Thank you very much, Professor Araki, for this wide-ranging discussion about Japanese employment, the lifelong employment system in particular, and the law that has underpinned that. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the 2021 Tokyo Seminar Series has had to be cancelled in its traditional form. We're hoping that 2022 we will return to Kyoto and Tokyo, and we certainly hope to see you there. Thank you.
Yes, I look forward to the next occasion. Thank you very much indeed.